continually advocate for sustainability policies and initiatives. Recently, we've been very involved in the electrification movement, which is one of the fastest ways to get emissions out of our environment. So I want to thank the sponsors. We couldn't do this without them. So our recent indicators report sponsors included the County of San Mateo, Oracle, Google, and Midpen Housing, along with the cities that you see below. We are very honored to have participation by almost all of the cities in the county. And we do want to thank our sponsors of our annual awards. So the benefactors for last spring's awards celebration are shown here. We're very grateful to them. And there are many other sponsors as well. You can see their names on this slide. All of them have been very supportive of us through the years. And there are, in addition, neighborhood sponsors who also have stepped up and helped support this annual awards program. So I want to give you a brief shout out to hold the date for the next happy hour, which will be Thursday, December 9th from 5:30 to 6:30. We're still nailing down the topic. We will not have a happy hour in late November due to the Thanksgiving holiday, and instead we'll have this one in early December. And you can see the link below where you can sign up today to be registered for that free event. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Susie, and she can take us through our trivia time.
All right, thanks, Terry. In honor of Halloween, as you said, Terry, we've got some good trivia related to spiders, followed up by our biodiversity quiz. So starting off, spiders, believe it or not, are among the most diverse group of animals on the planet. There are more than 45,000 known species. I had no clue they were that diverse. I'm sure my daughter would be very unhappy to hear that. It says here most are venomous, which I also didn't know. Okay, Terry, can we get the next slide?
Oh, sorry. Oops, it's not advancing. Hold on. Wonder why that's not working. There you go.
Oh, super. All right.
I think
here we've got the Goliath bird eater, the world's largest spider by weight and body. It has an 11-inch leg span. Oh my goodness. That's really terrifying.
Okay, and look at the size compared to a human hand. That is really terrifying, isn't it?
Yeah. We should find out where that is, because I definitely don't want to be there. Did we know Australia's funnel web spiders are probably the most toxic spiders to humans? Their bites can kill an adult in 24 hours without treatment and are even more lethal to children. I feel like we're on the news here and giving you all the worst things about spiders right now. Trivia question 1. How many primary species of venomous spiders are there in North America?
Okay, so this,
you can put your answers, what you think are the answers, in the chat.
Or you can hold up one finger for A, 2 fingers for B, and so forth to let us know what you think the correct answer is.
So let's see. What is the consensus here in the chat? Oh, we're kind of all over the map in the chat. All right, the correct answer is 2, which is C. There are 2 species of venomous spiders. We've got the black widow spider and the brown recluse. Despite the small size, black widows pack a poisonous punch, and their bites should be taken seriously. People bitten by a black widow can experience pain at the bite site, fever, nausea, and increased blood pressure. Whereas the brown recluse venom is very potent. When injected via a bite, it destroys cell membranes, leading to the breakdown of skin, fat, and blood vessels. Ultimately, this can trigger the death of surrounding affected tissues, a process known as necrosis. All right, next trivia question. This one's more biodiversity related. The US is one of only how many member states, or 2 member states of the UN that haven't signed on to the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity? True or false?
And I apologize, we do have a correction. It's 2. The number is 1.
Yeah, it should be 2.
Yeah. So
All right.
Raise 1 finger for A, 2 fingers for B, or put your answer in the chat.
All right, we're getting a lot of correct answers here. The answer is true. The US and the Vatican are the 2 member states of the UN that have not signed on. It has 193 parties. The Convention on Biological Diversity has near universal participation among countries. The convention, it was negotiated in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro during the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development. The international treaty was ratified by 193 contracting parties, representing a historic consensus. The Convention on Biological Diversity has 3 main objectives: the conservation of biological diversity, the sustainable use of the components of biological diversity, and the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising out of the utilization of genetic resources. All right, last trivia question, and we get to hear from our speakers. Okay, number 3, what is the primary function of spiders in nearly every ecosystem? A, serving as a food source for birds, lizards, wasps, and mammals. B, controlling insect populations. C, keeping away sources of disease. And D, providing venom for medical research. Go ahead and put your answer in the chat. Oh, looks like everybody's saying B, and that is correct. Super. All right.
And I think the other ones are also true to a lesser extent, right? I mean, I think all of those are true to some extent.
Yes. All righty. I think we can hop now into introducing our speakers. Up first tonight, we have Sophie Christel from Midpeninsula Regional Open Space District. Sophie manages projects related to climate change at Midpen, and including ways to seek to protect biodiversity by helping ecosystems adapt to new and future conditions. Sophie has earned her BS and MS in Earth Sciences at Stanford, and she loves to do bird watching and drawing, and we thank you so much for being here tonight. Take it away.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Let me see if I can get my presentation up. Okay. I think this is the one I wanted to share. Does that look right to everyone?
We're still waiting for it to pop up. But yeah, that looks good.
Okay, great. Well, welcome, and thank you so much for that great introduction. As Terry said, my name is Sophie Christel. I'm the management analyst and climate change specialist at Midpeninsula Regional Open Space District. And for anyone who is unfamiliar with Midpen, we are an independent special district with 26 open space preserves encompassing around 65,000 acres of land and across 3 counties: San Mateo County, Santa Clara County, and a little piece of Santa Cruz County down there in the lower right corner. We steward our land for both conservation and ecologically sensitive education, agricultural, and enjoyment. And I will be talking tonight about how Midpen supports biodiversity in our region. But before I get into that, I do want to zoom out for just a second and talk about global biodiversity. So we happen to be in a really fantastic place to be talking about biodiversity. We're here, that bright yellow arrow is pointing to the California Floristic Province, which is one of the planet's 34 biodiversity hotspots. So what makes this region so special? It really comes down to a couple of things. One is our really diverse, jumbly geology and topography, as well as the coastal influence of the ocean. And that creates a bunch of microclimates throughout the region and highly specialized ecosystems in response to those microclimates. And over millions of years, that has led to the proliferation of just a truly incredible abundance of biodiversity. So here in this California floristic province, we have an estimated 3,500 species of plants and animals, 61% of which are actually endemic, meaning they're not found anywhere else in the world. And the other thing that makes this place a biodiversity hotspot is that this abundance of biodiversity is threatened. Nearly a third of the species are listed as threatened or endangered, and at least 70 to 75% of the original habitat and native vegetation is estimated to have been lost to development or degradation. So that's sort of a downer, but let's move into something a little more hopeful, zooming back in. What is Midpen doing to protect the biodiversity of our region here on the peninsula? So we approach it from multiple angles. One of them is to protect sensitive species like this beautiful little San Francisco garter snake there on the slide. And one way that we protect sensitive species is by enhancing and restoring their habitat. We also limit public access to certain key habitat areas if they're very sensitive. We don't want people going in and disturbing the wildlife or the sensitive vegetation. And the other thing that we do is that we monitor, so we know what's going on, we know what's happening with these species. And I'm happy to tell you that we actually have volunteer opportunities if you would like to get involved with monitoring for some of these very cool species. We have volunteer groups that help us survey for burrowing owls, for badgers, and soon we will also have a group helping us survey for peregrine falcons. Another thing that we do at Midpen is to control invasive species on our land. So we have an integrated pest management program, or IPM program, through which we remove invasives using a variety of methods. And again, this is another area where there are volunteer opportunities with Midpen. You might be surprised to find out just how fun it is to pull weeds out in a beautiful open space preserve. And the last prong of our three-pronged biodiversity approach here is the landscape level management. So just in general, Midpen acquires and protects a lot of land, and just that action of protecting the land from development supports biodiversity by preserving those habitats. But more specifically, we use strategic acquisitions to create this sort of green belt, a stretch of protected land across the peninsula that provides connectivity between habitat patches at a larger scale and helps wildlife be able to move around throughout the region. And the last thing for landscape level management that I want to talk about is climate change resilience. As Terry mentioned in her presentation, climate change is a big threat to biodiversity, but there are things that we can do to help support our ecosystems and improve their resilience in the face of climate change. Excuse me. So to survive a changing climate, organisms can respond in a couple of ways. They either need to be able to adapt where they are, or they can find new, more suitable habitat over time. And we can help with both of these things. Midpen right now is working with the Santa Cruz Mountain Stewardship Network on a large project for climate adaptation and resilience throughout our region. And the Santa Cruz Mountain Stewardship Network is a network of many land managers in the region. And as part of this, we worked with consultants to do some climate modeling, because the first step before we can know what we need to do to protect biodiversity, the first step is to know what the impacts of climate change will be. Where are they going to occur? How severe will they be? And who will they most affect? And when I say who, I mean plants, animals, fungi, all living things. So our consultants modeled several different climate variables, temperature extremes, precipitation, fire risk, that sort of thing, and produced these very cool maps for us, which show us how things will change and where throughout up until the middle of this century. They also produced for us several vulnerability assessments, looking at different habitat types and species that we selected, to help us answer the question of who will be affected, who is most vulnerable to these impacts of climate change. And then we were able to start thinking about what we could do. So I'll just hit on a couple things since it's a short presentation, but the first one is this concept of refugia and connections. So refugia are areas, pockets of very high quality habitat usually, which is great for supporting these species, especially those that are less generalist and more specialist and depend on very particular conditions. These refugia can be really helpful for them, but it's even more helpful if they are connected so that animals can move in between these areas of high quality habitat. For plants, which can't really migrate as well, one of the important things to support is genetic diversity, because that variation in genetics helps ensure that as a whole, the population will have some individuals that can thrive and withstand the increases in heat, in drought, etc. And mid-pen, in fact, when we're doing restoration, one of the things that we sometimes think about is if we're planting new plants in an area, we're thinking about, are these plants going to still be able to thrive here in future conditions? If we're planting a tree in 50 years, is it still going to be happy in this spot? And the last thing I want to talk about is this concept of adaptive management. So we can do climate modeling until we're blue in the face, but at the end of the day, there's still going to be a fair amount of uncertainty. We know some things generally, and we can take action in anticipation of what we expect, but we also really need to be flexible. So adaptive management is sort of a cyclical process where you take action, you monitor what the results are, and then you adjust what you're doing based on what you've seen. And you can just repeat this as long as you need to, continually adapting to new conditions and responding to them. All right, so I just want to end on a little call to action and suggest a few things that you might be able to do to support biodiversity yourself and in your community. So the first one, of course, is to support conservation, support conservation groups and agencies. Another thing that you can do is to be a good steward of the land. And when you're out in the open spaces, adhere to the regulations and signage that you see. They're out there for a reason. So if it says to stay on trail, it's so you don't trample the sensitive plants or disturb the wildlife. Same thing goes for, of course, things like carrying out your trash and leashing your pets and that sort of thing. You can also create pockets of urban habitat. You can create little refugia within the urban landscape. If you have a garden, plant natives, support native green spaces on publicly owned land. And these are really great for highly mobile species like birds and pollinators that can kind of flit around and take advantage of these little pockets of quality habitat within the urban matrix. And the last thing, which is especially relevant for San Mateo County, since I know there's a lot of agriculture, to support sustainable agriculture. There's lots of ways that commercial enterprises can coexist with native vegetation and wildlife and healthy soils. And so seek out and support your local sustainable agriculture. And I think with that does it for me. I wanted to share my contact information if anyone is interested in reaching out to me or just learning more about Midpen and what we do. Our website is right there, openspace.org. And yes, thank you so much for having me speak tonight.
Thanks so much, Sophie. That was a really, really great presentation. I love how you just sort of, you really distilled it down in a way that was easy to get in a short period of time. So thanks for doing that. Next we have, next we have.
Sharing your screen.
I'm trying to figure out how to stop. Oh, there's a big red button. Stop share. Okay.
Okay.
There we go.
There we go. Okay.
Okay, hang on.
Super. All right. Next we have Annie Burke, Executive Director from Together Bay Area. It's a regional coalition of nonprofits, tribes, and agencies collaborating for climate resiliency and equity. They have member organizations working to promote healthy lands, people, and communities in all 9 counties of the region, plus Santa Cruz County. Annie is passionate about convening people and catalyzing change through a variety of ways, including films, projects, events, and experiences. I wish we had time to learn about all of these. She grew up in the East Bay and spent much of her childhood in the pumpkin patches and beaches on San Mateo County coast. Right, Annie, please take it away.
Great, thank you so much for having me. And it's just so great to see you all here. Happy after major storm. We survived the major downpour of this past weekend, and I just want to thank you all for coming and for having me. Sustainable San Mateo County. I want to start by telling you just a little bit about Together Bay Area, in that, as Susie said, we're a regional coalition of organizations in the Bay Area, nonprofits, indigenous tribes, and public agencies, all working for climate resilience and social equity. And we have quite a few San Mateo County-based members. So I want to give them a shout out, including Midpen, and thank you so much, Sophie, for that presentation. Also San Mateo County Parks, San Mateo County Parks Foundation, San Mateo RCD, or Resource Conservation District, Pie Ranch, Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy, Peninsula Open Space Trust, Coastside Land Trust. So there's a lot of organizations here that, or in San Mateo, that are a part of Together Bay Area, and I just want to give them a shout out. So that's me. I grew up in the East Bay, as Susie said, but I spent a lot of time in San Mateo County. I'm going to guess this is at Arata's, before Arata's Pumpkin Patch became the much bigger festival that it is today. I want to also acknowledge that while I grew up here in the Bay Area, I also, my ancestors are not from here. My people, my family is from Scotland and came over here many years ago, but this is not where my people are from, even though I personally feel a huge connection to this place. Hold on, buttons. So I want to just tell you 3 stories today. The first is what grounds and guides Together Bay Area. Second is how a global pandemic is catalyzing transformation in the Bay Area, and specifically around biodiversity, which I know is today's topic. And the third is taking a regional approach to biodiversity conservation. We heard really great presentations from Midpen about what they're doing within their footprint, their geographic scope. There's so much work happening around the rest of the region that I want to highlight for you tonight. So story number 1, Together Bay Area. First, we acknowledge that these lands that we're on today have been stewarded for thousands of years. The separation between people and nature is an artificial one that is not one that is shared by the people, the original stewards of this place. So while those tractors may be a new invention, these lands have been stewarded for many, many years. And they've been stewarded by people, including people like this gentleman from the Amamutsan tribal band. And people of all kinds can be land stewards, just as Sophie said, that there's so much that anyone can do to take good care of this place. If nothing else, it's to not destroy it or hurt it. It's to help it thrive and be what we need it to be. As Terry said at the beginning, like, there is no human population without biodiversity. So anybody can participate in land stewardship. And that all lands need to be stewarded. Together Bay Area is really founded on how it's not just about open space. It's not just about Mount Umunum or Mount Diablo or Mount Tam, but it's really all lands need to be stewarded. Urban, rural, natural, and working lands. So urban forests, like the ones in San Francisco or other major cities in the region, but also redwood forests, and that there's different reasons why we need to take care of these places, but we need all of them in the face of climate change. The other thing we need in this time, in the 21st century, are relationships. We need to be in relationship with one another, with the planet, with the place that we live, with the flora, the fauna, that we are all very interdependent. And so relationships are really key. So that's a little bit about Together Bay Area and what we're founded on. And as you all know, there's been a lot of change over the past year and a half or however long it's been. And there's been a few things that we've done at Together Bay Area that I want to highlight. One is that there's a tremendous amount of collaboration and innovation happening around the region. You don't see it because it looks like this. It looks like a Zoom meeting. it's hard to track it in the same way that you might have seen it before through events or whatever. But there's an enormous amount of collaboration that's happening. And as a convener, somebody who brings people together across the region, it's much easier to do that now, actually, than it has been before. I can much more easily convene a meeting with folks from San Jose and Santa Rosa in a way that would have been really challenging before. We're also talking a lot about fire and fire smart landscapes and how we can live with fire. Not the big catastrophic scary ones, but how we can bring fire back into the landscape in order to for safety, but also for biodiversity, and taking care of the land, just as I said a few minutes ago, is really a critical part of how we help biodiversity thrive, is by actively stewarding these lands, and fire is part of that that work. We also have been talking a lot, there's not very many interesting pictures during COVID era. They're mostly website screenshots like this, that we've had a lot of meetings over the past year and a half around a range of different topics, from fire to COVID to biodiversity to the 30 by 30 initiative that the state is leading. There's just a whole lot of work that's going on, and I know the slide isn't very pretty. This is prettier. One of the things that Together Bay Area has done over the past year and a half, 2 years, is help to secure funding for the State Coastal Conservancy, which is a really important program for the region in terms of land conservation, as well as public access to parks, restoration and stewardship. And I just want to highlight the importance of the Coastal Conservancy for the topic that we're talking about tonight, biodiversity. And that the governor has signed a bill to support, to provide funding, $500 million actually, for the State Coastal Conservancy in next year's budget. So that's something that we're going to be monitoring. Together Bay Area also has been participating in the 30 by 30 initiative, which is an executive order issued by Governor Newsom, and shortly followed by an executive order by President Biden to conserve 30% of the state's lands and waters by the year 2030. And so that's something that we're participating in along with a lot of our members. Just want to highlight that. The third story I want to tell is about taking a regional approach to conserving biodiversity. The work that Midpen is doing is really important, and so much of what we're doing for biodiversity is a hyper-local activity. It's something around a particular stand of trees or a creek or it really happens at the local level. And there's a lot of commonalities around the region and a lot of reasons why we need and want to leverage what's happening at the local scale, at the regional, state, and federal levels. So at Together Bay Area, we are working to conserve biodiversity for lots of different reasons. They're all very interconnected. One of the things that's happening a lot now is, or a term that's being used a lot now, is multi-benefit. And we don't just protect a forest or conserve a forest for one reason, we conserve a forest for many reasons, because they're all very interrelated, and they all really are super important during this time of climate change. So over the past 15 years, a group of people have come together to identify what lands are most essential for biodiversity. We've had over 100 different people participate in a project called the Conservation Lands Network. And the Conservation Lands Network works with 9 counties of the Bay Area plus Santa Cruz County, so it's 10 counties, and identifies what lands are most essential for biodiversity. And a whole lot of people have participated in this program. I don't expect you to read all these names, but I just want I want to bring some of these perspectives into the room, knowing that there's a whole lot of people that have made this possible. And what the CLN does is it identifies what lands are urbanized, cultivated, conserved, and then it used a computer modeling system to identify what lands have the most benefit for flora and fauna, taking into account some of the things that Sophie talked about earlier: connectivity, refugia, streams and water and the importance of that for wildlife as well as for plants and vegetation. And this conservation lands network can be used at the local scale to understand how a particular place fits into a larger network, for redwood forests, for example, or oak woodlands or grasslands. But it also can be used to make the case for funding that we need in order to conserve this at the regional scale. One of the things about this conservation lands network is that we have a goal. We have goals for specific kinds of habitats, but we also have a goal to conserve 2.5 million acres of lands by 2050, and that's about half of the Bay Area. And we have done that analysis so that it does not preclude, or it does not mean that means no housing or limited housing for people. It means that when we build climate smart cities, we can conserve the lands around them to provide the most essential services we need for living here. Frankly, it's as we talked about earlier, the basis of living here, living humans, is the need for biodiversity. So this is not an either or, but really an and, a yes and. And we're working along with our members to work to achieve this goal, which is definitely achievable. And lastly, I just want to wrap up with 2 points. One is that the Conservation Lands Network is part of, has sisters, has a bayland habitats as well as subtidal habitats. And so with funding and support from the California Coastal Conservancy, as well as the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, this region is doing some really innovative and cool work, thinking about how do we conserve habitats for biodiversity from below the water all the way up to the ridge lines. So there's a real, I want you all to think, want you all to take away from this that there's an enormous amount of work happening around this region to protect biodiversity. And I'll wrap up there by saying that thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for doing what you're doing individually and collectively for sustainable San Mateo County, but also for your work in the region. It's at this time, we really need all hands on deck. Whatever you can contribute, whatever you can do really matters. So thank you so much for being here, and I'll wrap up there.
Thank you, Annie. That was really fascinating. I learned a lot that I did not know. So let's see. I had to restart because I had a little technical problem. So let me move down here to, we're going to talk about our, entertain your questions now. We'd love to have you put them in the chat. And Susie, would you like to introduce our moderator?
Sure. I'm happy to introduce Kirsten Keith. She's a Sustainable San Mateo County board member who's moderated many of these discussions before and is going to do that for us now. Thank you, Kirsten.
Great. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you here tonight. And I want to say a big thank you to Sophie and Annie for all your amazing information. It is a lot. And as you heard, if you want to ask any questions, we have access to the chat. You can put your questions in here. And I'm looking in here in the chat now. And I guess I don't see any yet. And I'm going to ask Sophie, I'll start with you, Sophie. Can you just tell us one thing that people could do now to help with issues of sustainability and biodiversity?
One thing. I think you're all already doing it. Be involved with the local initiatives that are supporting this type of work. Be aware of what's going on in your region and what you can do to be a part of it. I think that's the way that we can leverage our power as individuals, is to come together in groups like this and understand the problems that we're facing and work together to find solutions.
Yes. And Annie, anything you want to add to that?
No, I want to enthusiastically support what you said.
Terrific. Great. And we have some guiding questions up here as well right now. What forces are trying to prevent biodiversity? Annie, do you want to start with that?
Sure. It's a big one, and I'm going to take a risk and say it out loud in this forum with a lot of people that I don't know. Greed.
Greed
is what's destroying biodiversity. It's concrete. It's not being in relationship with the place that we depend on to take care of us. It's when we talk about this work, like one of the things that I find is that a lot in the environmental sector, which is a huge sector, there's a lot of times environmentalists are working against environmentalists because of different positions, or you work on renewable energy and I work on something else or whatever. The truth is we're fighting against a pretty big machine that is much bigger than any one of our little organizations. And that greed and is really the enemy we need to be all lining up to work against.
Okay, yeah. Well, thanks for saying it like it is. And I'm going to go to Sophie with this next question that we have in the chat from, here we go, from Michael Campbell. How important are the suburban streams to biodiversity? So many seem culverted, developed, controlled by cities, Army Corps, etc. And I just want to point out that, yes, I see that as well. And I happen to live right near a stream that is still natural, and it's so rare to find, but it's here that divides Menlo Park from Palo Alto. And it's one of the few examples that have not been channelized or concrete, placed in there, and it still has trees and biodiversity. But anyway, if you want to try and tackle that one, Sophie.
Sure. I mean, I can't say that it is something I have specifically studied, but just based on observations and my understanding of the way that our systems are set up for drainage, I have observed certainly biodiversity in those culverted and concrete channels, but certainly not to the degree that you would see in an unhardened stream. I think any waterway is going to be a type of corridor for wildlife, and some of the larger species, coyotes, mountain lions, will go into a culvert and use that as a passageway. And in some cases, if they're smaller culverts, smaller in length, not necessarily in height or width, but if they say pass under a highway or something like that, that can actually be a really valuable place for wildlife to move safely rather than trying to cross a large highway. So they serve dual purpose in that sense. But as far as a habitat, I think they're probably more supportive of movement than they ever could be as habitat.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up about serving as a passageway underneath freeways, because we see that so infrequently, either over or under. And I know it's an additional cost, but it is absolutely something that we should be pushing more for, so that we don't see all these animals, dead on the side of the road. I want to go back to another question in here about environmental and social justice issues, and how you take into account. It's Meg Mitchell. I'm sorry if I mispronounced the last name, but could either of you speak to how environmental justice is integrated into your organization's planning? And maybe Annie, could we start with you?
Absolutely. It's center. It's the beginning of this organization. Together Bay Area is the second iteration of an organization called the Bay Area Open Space Council. And when we reformed this organization and renamed it, we really centered it around equity, and have expanded that to really be focused on justice, equity, and belonging. One way that works, gets manifested in our work is our work to build the capacity of and build leadership in Indigenous communities in the Bay Area. And we're working in multiple ways to do that work. A lot of our members are talking about returning land or co-managing public land with Indigenous tribes and groups. And that's both really important from a justice and equity perspective, but also from a climate change and climate resilience perspective. Indigenous land practices are a really important way that we can be more in relationship with the earth and return some of the natural systems to their functionality. So that's one way that we're doing that work.
Wonderful, thank you. Sophie, do you want to add a little more?
Sure. I think MidPen is doing a lot of similar things to Together Bay Area in terms of trying to involve tribes and diverse populations in what we're doing, particularly through our public outreach process when we're planning new projects. But I think another important aspect of what we do is to do with the access to open space and the impacts of not having natural spaces to go to can be really hard on people, and it tends to be the more vulnerable populations that don't have access to open space. So we are always looking for ways to try and get folks out to our preserves so they can benefit from all the great things that recreating in open space can provide.
If I can jump in, Kirsten,
Yes,
quick,
please, go
just
right ahead.
give some love to MidPen for the partnership that MidPen has with the Amamutsin Tribal Band and the work at the top of Mount Umunum. They're really a leader in this. I've been working for years to build a partnership with the Amamutsin and in really deep and meaningful ways that we all have a lot to learn from. So just want to give you, Sophie, some appreciation for the work that you're all doing.
Thanks for that shout out, Annie. Yes, I would recommend if anyone is interested in learning more about that project. It was a very cool restoration project that we did with the Amamutsin on the summit of Mount Umunum to restore essentially what had been the top of the mountain cut off, to restore it to its historic shape and restore the area's ecosystem. So you can learn more about that on our website.
Amazing work, and people can actually go hike that now.
Yes, yes. And there is also a ceremonial circle at the top of the summit there.
Fabulous. And we're getting closer to running out of time, so I'm going to do a little bit of a lightning round. And Sophie, can you address how light pollution is a main driver for an insect apocalypse and its negative effect on the ecosystem integrity? Thank you, Susie Hodges.
Oh, light pollution is one of my pet peeves. Okay. Yeah, it's an attractor for not only insects, but also birds. And that's actually more my specialty. So I'm gonna kind of warp the question in that direction. But the insects are drawn to the light. Birds then are also drawn to the light, and it can result in just massive amounts of death, particularly during migration season. That wildlife flying at night can't tell the difference between a window and air when there's a light behind it, and it results in a lot of mortality that could easily be avoided by simply turning off the lights. Similarly, along riparian corridors, the color of the light is very important. Bluer lights, a lot of our street lights are now shifting toward these bluer LEDs and away from the yellower lights we used to see, and that can disrupt breeding cycles. It can disrupt day-night cycles for different wildlife, and really become a problem.
Yes, yep. And thank you for that. And somebody in here wrote about the LA River being channelized. And I want to say, I know parts of the LA River it is channelized, but in Los Angeles, there's a concerted effort now to actually take back that river. And there are small sections, say a mile long, where you can actually kayak it now, believe it or not. And so they're doing some amazing work down in LA to try and bring that back to life. And Terry Nagel, you had a question in here about how, I'm looking for it.
Well, just how the average person can help create habitats
Yes.
for, not just butterflies, but what else can we do?
Annie, can you take that?
I'll try. I'm not an expert, so I'm going to ask for Sophie's backup. But one of the things that stands out for me is how resilient and adaptive the natural world is, as we are too, as part of the natural world. So anything that we can do, whether that's a native plant on your windowsill or a balcony or a whole garden that you can, plant drought-friendly native plants. I mean, as small or as big as you can go, I think makes a big difference. I learned once that older cities have more biodiversity than younger cities. So like Rome, in comparison to, say, New York, Rome has, I don't know the numbers, a lot more biodiversity than newer cities. So the more we can bring nature, natural systems into our urban areas, the better off we're all going to be, and we're all contributing in some small way. And Sophie, please jump in if I missed something.
And we want to get to more questions too. So we're almost coming to an end, but go ahead, Sophie.
I'll cede the floor.
Okay, I want to ask this. Is 30% of California to be conserved by 2030? This is from Susie Hodges. Is that a lot? Is it sufficient or not enough? And what is it compared to other states?
Really good question. I'm going to say two things, knowing that we have short amount of time. One is that there's a lot of science and scientific leaders who say that we need 50%, not 30%, of the earth in order to have a thriving and healthy ecosystem and healthy planet. So what's enough is, up for a debate, and there's lots of opinions. The other point I'll make is that whether or not we have, if that's kind of how that compares or what that means within the state of California, it depends on how you define conserved. And that's one of the things that's being discussed right now is, are all public lands, even if there's timber use or working lands, are they included? So just how you define what you include and conserve changes that answer pretty significantly. And that's kind of where the conversation's at right now.
Very interesting. Sophie, do you have anything you want to add, or is that?
I think that covered it pretty well. I believe there is also a federal 30 by 30 initiative
Yes,
that California is echoing. Yeah.
Great. And then this is probably just going to be our last question. And it's a very specific from Elaine Salinger. She says that there's a habitat for the red-legged frog in a stream below her home, and the frogs were washed out 20 years ago. Do you know anyone who could help reestablish them, and who has access to eggs?
That is a very interesting question. I don't know of any reestablishment projects in our area. Midpen has not done any that I'm aware of. We have a pretty robust red-legged frog population within our lands, so we mainly try to protect them where they are. But that's if you send me an email, I can ask some folks and see if or send me a direct message and I'll give you my email and I can ask around and see if there is anything like that going on.
Fascinating. Wonderful. Well, thank you. We can connect you. Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Sophie and Annie. You're a wealth of knowledge. And thank you to everybody who's participating this evening with your great questions. It's a really engaged group, and that always makes this very interesting. So thanks a lot, everybody. I'll pass it back.
So thank you very much, Kirsten, too, for leading that discussion. Learned a lot. There are a lot more questions in the chat that we should round up and try to get answers to, because I think this was a very engaged conversation. So to finish off our happy hour, we want to share with you a recipe for Witch's Brew Green Halloween Punch. And the recipe is here. It actually has smoke coming out of it. So it's kind of fun, to make. You might want to share this with your friends. I'll show you, there is a link to the recipe on YouTube. So if you want to see how to make it, they give you a demonstration here. And maybe we could put that link in the chat too, guys, so that people could copy it more easily. Anyway, so then we are now at the end of our time. I wanted to encourage you folks to sign up for our next happy hour, which is going to be December 9th. Once again, we are not going to have one in late November due to the holiday. There you can see that drink in action, thanks to Marjorie, who's got this animation down pat. But there is the link to sign up for that. We would love to have you join us. We're still narrowing down the topics. And by the way, we love hearing your suggestions for topics and speakers too for these monthly get-togethers. So thank you everyone for sharing your time with us. Thank you to Annie and Sophie for such excellent presentations. And we wish you all a very happy Halloween. Okay, so thanks again. Any parting words, anybody?
Typically, Terry, we will send out the chat to the participants and to Annie and Sophie if they want to respond with any answers they might have.
That would be great. Wow, super. And then we will share those with the participants, right? So,
yes.
Okay, well, thank you so much. All right. Well, have a very good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us.
Okay.
Thanks.